Night settled over New York like a heavy curtain, muting the city's roar into a low, distant hum. From the outside, power looked loud sirens, headlines, flashing lights, but the most enduring influence often moved quietly, through hallways where names were never spoken above a whisper. This is the world in which Joseph Corozzo learned to exist. Not at the front of the room, not behind a microphone, but in the shadows where decisions were shaped, alliances tested, and futures quietly redirected. Born into an era when neighborhoods were tight, loyalty was currency, and reputation traveled faster than truth, Corozzo grew up, watching how authority really worked. He observed the difference between men who demanded respect and those who inspired it. In working-class streets, where opportunity was scarce and temptation plentiful, he learned early that survival depended on awareness of people, of timing, of consequences. These lessons would later become the foundation of a life spent navigating invisible lines. As a young man, Corozzo was not drawn to chaos. He was drawn to order. In a world often portrayed as reckless, the underground actually prized discipline. Every move carried risk, and mistakes echoed far beyond the moment. Those who lasted were not the loudest or the most violent, but the most measured. Corozzo paid attention to this truth. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to remember details others forgot, and to understand that silence could be more powerful than bravado. The American Mafia of the late 20th century was not a single entity, but a network of families, traditions, and unwritten rules. It thrived on structure. At its core was a belief in hierarchy, secrecy, and obligation. To outsiders, it looked like an empire built on fear. To insiders, it functioned more like a corporation, roles defined, expectations clear, and consequences absolute. Corozzo found his place within the system not by force, but by reliability. Trust was never given freely. It was earned over time through consistency. Corozzo demonstrated an ability to manage sensitive matters without drawing attention. He handled disputes quietly, ensured messages reached the right ears, and understood when to act and when to wait. These skills made him valuable. In an environment where exposure meant downfall, discretion was priceless. The 1970s marked a turning point. Law enforcement agencies began to adapt, using new strategies to penetrate organizations that had long operated untouched. Surveillance improved. Informants became more common. The walls that once felt impenetrable started to thin. Within this pressure cooker, Corozzo's approach proved effective. He avoided unnecessary visibility. He understood that longevity required restraint. Power in this world did not always announce itself. Sometimes it existed in a nod across a room, a delayed response to a request, or a decision not to act. Corozzo became associated with this quieter form of influence. He was known for understanding the broader picture, how a single action could ripple across families, territories, and years. This perspective set him apart from those who chased short-term gains. Money flowed through many channels, but it was never just about profit. Control mattered. Stability mattered. Corozzo grasped that reckless greed attracted attention, and attention invited scrutiny. By favoring moderation and patience, he helped maintain balance during volatile times. This did not make him harmless, it made him strategic. Relationships were the true infrastructure of organized crime. They were built slowly and could collapse instantly. Corozzo invested in these bonds carefully. He remembered favors and repaid them. He avoided public disputes. When conflicts arose, he sought solutions that preserved long-term interest rather than personal pride. Such an approach reduced violence and chaos, even within a criminal framework. As decades passed, the romantic image of the mafia faded, replaced by courtroom sketches and lengthy sentences. The risks increased, and the rewards diminished. Yet some figures endured longer than others. Corozzo's endurance was tied to his understanding of change. He recognized when old methods no longer worked and adjusted accordingly, emphasizing caution over confrontation. From an educational perspective, his story illustrates a critical truth: crime adapts, but so does accountability. The same intelligence that allows individuals to navigate illicit systems could have built legitimate success if applied differently. The discipline, patience, and strategic thinking displayed in the shadows are traits that, when redirected, can create lawful achievements. The silence that surrounded Corozzo was not accidental, it was cultivated. In a culture where talk led to trouble, restraint became survival. This silence, however, also isolated him. Life spent guarding words and intentions leaves little room for genuine connection. The cost of secrecy is often loneliness. As night deepens over the city, it becomes clear that the quiet figures often shape history as much as the famous one. Corozzo's early path shows how influence can grow without spectacle, and how choices made repeatedly over years can lock a person into a world where exits are rare. This opening chapter is not an endorsement of that world, but a study of it. Understanding how such systems function helps demystify them and strip away false glamour. Crime promises power, but delivers consequences. The shadows may offer cover, but they also limit vision. The lesson begins here. Real strength lies not in secrecy or control over others, but in transparency, lawful ambition, and the courage to choose a path that does not require hiding from the light. The streets that shaped Joseph Corozzo were not just lines of pavement and brick. They were classrooms where unwritten rules were taught every day. Respect was earned slowly, often through restraint rather than aggression. Young men watched older ones carefully, learning who spoke too much, who lasted, and who disappeared. In these environments, memory became a survival skill. Remembering faces, favors, and slights mattered as much as physical strength. Corozzo absorbed these lessons quietly, understanding that awareness was the first layer of protection. As he matured, opportunities appeared not as invitations but as tests. Small responsibilities came first, tasks that required reliability and discretion. The underground economy relied on people who could follow instructions without asking unnecessary questions. Corozzo proved capable of this. He understood that even minor missteps could echo outward, drawing attention from rivals or authorities. His careful approach earned him a reputation as someone who could be trusted with sensitive matters. The American Mafia during this period was undergoing subtle changes. The old generation, which relied heavily on tradition and fear, was giving way to a new reality shaped by technology and law enforcement pressure. Phones were tapped, movements tracked, and financial trails examined. Survival increasingly depended on adaptability. Corozzo recognized this shift early. He avoided habits that drew scrutiny and favored methods that minimized exposure. Money remained a central motivator, but it was never the only one. Control over territory, influence within networks, and the ability to resolve disputes quietly all carried weight. Corozzo's role often placed him between competing interests, where words mattered more than weapons. He learned to frame outcomes as mutual benefits, reducing the likelihood of escalation. This talent for mediation limited violence and preserved stability, even within a criminal framework. Trust, however, was fragile. A single rumor could unravel years of careful positioning. Corozzo maintained a low profile, resisting the temptation to display success. Flashy lifestyles attracted attention from both rivals and authorities. By blending into his surroundings, he reduced risk. This choice reflected a deeper understanding. Visibility is rarely an asset in illicit worlds. Law enforcement strategies evolved rapidly. Prosecutors began to rely on cooperative witnesses, financial analysis, and long-term investigations rather than isolated arrests. The pressure intensified. Many individuals reacted with panic, making reckless decisions that accelerated their downfall. Corozzo chose patience instead. He understood that reacting emotionally often created evidence. Silence, once again, became a shield. The psychological toll of such a life was significant. Constant vigilance left little room for relaxation. Every interaction carried subtext. Corozzo learned to read people carefully. Tone, timing, hesitation all revealed information. This skill extended beyond survival. It became a form of quiet control. Knowing when someone was uncertain or fearful allowed him to navigate conversations toward safer outcomes. Despite popular portrayals, organized crime was rarely glamorous. Long hours, stress, and the ever-present threat of betrayal defined daily life. Corozzo accepted these realities without illusion. He did not chase celebrity or recognition. His ambition was measured, focused on longevity rather than notoriety. This mindset distinguished him from those who burned brightly and vanished quickly. Family and personal life existed under constant strain. Secrecy limited genuine connection. Trusting even close acquaintances carried risk. Corozzo compartmentalized his world, separating personal emotions from professional obligations. While this strategy reduced vulnerability, it also narrowed his emotional range. The cost of survival was often paid in isolation. As years passed, the consequences of early choices became clearer. Paths once chosen were difficult to abandon. The network that provided protection also imposed obligation. Loyalty was expected, even when circumstances changed. Corozzo understood that exiting such a system was rarely clean. Many who attempted it faced severe repercussions, reinforcing the sense of permanence. From an educational perspective, this phase of his life highlights how environments shape behavior. When legitimate opportunities feel inaccessible, alternative systems emerge. These systems reward discipline and loyalty but punish independence. Corozzo's experience demonstrates how intelligence and adaptability can sustain involvement but cannot eliminate risk. The broader cultural impact of organized crime also shifted during this time. Public fascination waned as realities became visible through trials and testimonies. The myth of honor eroded, replaced by images of lengthy sentences and fractured families. For those inside, the change was sobering. The future promised fewer rewards and harsher consequences. Corozzo adjusted by narrowing his exposure and emphasizing caution. He avoided unnecessary expansion and focused on maintaining balance. This strategy reduced immediate danger but could not erase accumulated risk. Every year added history, and history attracted attention. As the decade progressed, it became clear that the era of untouchable figures was ending. Accountability loomed closer than ever. Corozzo's journey through this period serves as a reminder that no system built on secrecy and illegality remains immune forever. The lesson here is quiet but firm. Intelligence used to navigate harmful systems does not equal wisdom. True success lies in building a life that does not require constant defense. Awareness and discipline are powerful tools, but their greatest value emerges when applied to lawful paths. This chapter closes on a simple truth: choices made early echo loudly later. The streets teach survival, but they rarely teach peace. Lasting security comes not from control over shadows, but from the courage to step into a future shaped by legality, transparency, and purpose. Power rarely announces itself. More often it settles into routines, habits, and quiet expectations. For Joseph Corozzo, influence grew not through dramatic confrontations, but through steady presence. People learned that when situations became complicated, he remained composed. In environments driven by impulse, calmness stood out. This trait positioned him as someone others deferred to, even without formal authority. The underworld functioned on predictability. Deals depended on timing, payments, and trust that obligations would be honored. Corozzo understood that reliability was a form of currency. He focused on ensuring that arrangements were fulfilled without unnecessary friction. When problems arose, he approached them methodically, reducing emotional reactions that could escalate tensions. This approach earned respect from those who valued stability over spectacle. As networks expanded, coordination became more complex. Messages passed through intermediaries, each step introducing potential risk. Corozzo minimized these risks by keeping communication efficient and limited. He preferred direct channels when possible and avoided unnecessary detail. This discipline reduced misunderstandings and protected those involved from exposure. Silence, once again, proved useful. The pressure from law enforcement continued to intensify. Surveillance technologies improved, and long-term investigations replaced quick raids. This environment rewarded patience and punished haste. Corozzo adapted by slowing operations, favoring fewer transactions with higher levels of discretion. While this reduced immediate profits, it extended longevity. The choice reflected a deeper understanding of risk management. Within illicit systems, leadership often emerges during crises. Disputes over territory, money, or loyalty tested individuals' judgment. Corozzo demonstrated an ability to resolve conflicts without resorting to force. He reframed disagreements as shared problems, emphasizing consequence rather than pride. By doing so, he preserved relationships that might otherwise have fractured. This form of influence carried weight. Others began to consult him before making decisions, valuing his perspective. He did not seek this role openly, but accepted it cautiously. Visibility was dangerous, yet avoidance could appear weak. Balancing these opposing risks required careful calibration. Corozzo navigated this balance with restraint. Financial management became increasingly important. Authorities followed money trails aggressively, targeting assets rather than individuals. Corozzo recognized that complexity attracted scrutiny. He favored simplicity and avoided patterns that appeared suspicious. This conservative approach limited growth but reduced vulnerability. In illicit environments, survival often depended on what one chose not to do. The human cost of this life remained constant. Stress accumulated quietly, manifesting in vigilance and guarded interactions. Trust was conditional, even among allies. Corozzo learned to operate within this tension, compartmentalizing emotions to maintain clarity. While effective professionally, this strategy restricted emotional depth, reinforcing isolation. Popular culture continued to distort realities, portraying criminal influence as glamorous or heroic. Inside the system, the contrast was stark. Long hours, constant anxiety, and the knowledge that mistakes could be irreversible defined daily existence. Corozzo saw through the illusion. He understood that reputation offered limited protection against accountability. As time passed, generational shifts altered dynamics. Younger participants often lacked patience, seeking rapid gains and recognition. Their impulsiveness increased risk for everyone involved. Corozzo viewed this trend cautiously, limiting association with unpredictable individuals. Experience taught him that recklessness invited collapse. Adaptation required humility. Methods that once worked became liabilities. Corozzo adjusted by reducing exposure and emphasizing discretion. He understood that influence did not require expansion. Sometimes contraction preserved control. This philosophy contrasted sharply with those who equated power with constant growth. Ethically, this period underscores a difficult truth. Skills such as negotiation, risk assessment, and emotional regulation are valuable in legitimate contexts. When applied within illegal systems, they prolong harm rather than create benefit. Corozzo. This effectiveness highlights how talent can be misdirected when opportunities are constrained or choices misguided. The broader societal impact of organized crime became increasingly visible. Communities bore the consequences through instability and fear. Law enforcement responses grew more sophisticated, reflecting public demand for accountability. The space for secrecy narrowed further. Corozzo, as experienced during this phase, illustrates the illusion of control. Even the most cautious individuals remained vulnerable to forces beyond their influence. Informants, technological advances, and shifting legal standards. Mastery within an unlawful system did not equate to immunity. As nights passed and routines continued, the weight of accumulated decisions pressed quietly. The path chosen years earlier constrained future options. While adaptability delayed consequences, it could not eliminate them. This reality loomed constantly, shaping behavior and expectations. The lesson here is subtle yet powerful. Influence built on secrecy is inherently unstable. True authority arises from transparency and legitimacy. The discipline required to survive in shadows could, if redirected, build lasting success without fear. This chapter closes with a reminder: intelligence and patience are tools, not guarantees. When used to sustain harmful systems, they deepen entanglement. Freedom, in its truest sense, comes from choices that do not require constant vigilance but allow life lived openly, responsibly, and without regret. In a city defined by noise, lights, and constant movement, Joseph Corozzo, as power existed in the subtle spaces between events. He did not dominate with spectacle, he commanded through presence. Influence often grows not through confrontation, but through reliability, perception, and timing. Those who understood him learned that his silence carried weight, that decisions made quietly often shaped outcomes more than overt action. The networks he operated within were complex. Each family, crew, and individual had its own history, rivalries, and expectations. Navigating these intricacies required not just knowledge of rules, but intuition about people. Corozzo excelled at reading subtle cues: hesitation in speech, a shift in posture, an unexplained absence. These signals informed his actions and guided interventions that maintained balance without resorting to aggression. Financial dealings were pervasive but carefully managed. Money was a tool, not a goal in itself. Large transactions attracted attention. Small, consistent movement preserved discretion. Corozzo learned to prioritize risk management over rapid accumulation. Patience, in this context, equaled survival. Decisions were often calculated not for immediate gain, but for long-term security. The legal landscape was evolving rapidly. Prosecutors and federal agencies employed sophisticated strategies to target organized crime. Corozzo observed these changes closely, adjusting routines and minimizing exposure. Every interaction was scrutinized for potential vulnerabilities. Paradoxically, Caution sometimes increased influence, as reliability and consistency became more valued when external pressure intensified. Relationships were central to his role. Loyalty and trust were scarce commodities, earned over years and tested repeatedly. Corozzo treated these bonds seriously, understanding that reputation could be ruined by a single misstep. He prioritized keeping commitments, honoring agreements, and resolving disputes discreetly. These actions built a network of allies who respected his judgment and deferred to his decisions, often without realizing the depth of his influence. Psychologically, the environment demanded constant vigilance. Threats were not always obvious, and the consequences of errors were immediate and severe. Corozzo developed mental discipline to navigate this tension. He learned to anticipate reactions, predict outcomes, and adjust strategies accordingly. This foresight allowed him to act before crises escalated, often preventing situations that could have caused lasting damage. Public perception of crime was frequently distorted. Media and popular culture romanticized violence and risk, obscuring the consequences in day-to-day realities. Corozzo's world was far less glamorous. It involved long hours of planning, careful observation, and meticulous record-keeping. Most decisions were invisible to outsiders, yet they carried real consequences. The work was demanding, mentally and emotionally, even when physically quiet. The generational shift within organizations introduced additional complexity. Younger associates often sought rapid gains, impatient with traditional methods. Their impulsiveness increased exposure and risk. Corozzo mitigated these tendencies by offering guidance when possible and limiting association when necessary. Patience and consistency, honed over decades, distinguished him from more reckless peers. Ethically, his experience illustrates the duality of human skill. Negotiation, strategic planning, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence are valuable traits. Within illegal frameworks, they serve survival and influence, but at societal cost. These same skills, applied to lawful endeavors, could generate sustainable success without fear or exposure. Corozzo's life demonstrates both the power of human capability and the consequences of its misdirection. The persistent weight of secrecy shaped daily life. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited. Family and personal connections carried strain, as trust extended to only a select few. This isolation was both protective and burdensome, a recurring theme for anyone navigating complex underground networks. The balance between influence and solitude required careful navigation. Crisis management became a daily practice. Unexpected developments, whether from law enforcement, rivals, or internal disagreements, demanded adaptability. Corozzo approached these challenges analytically. Emotions were controlled, responses measured. By intervening early, he often prevented escalation. This control reinforced his reputation for reliability and wisdom. The external pressures of society, technology, and law enforcement were relentless. Every decision carried potential consequences. Corozzo's success was grounded in his ability to anticipate these pressures, adjust strategies, and maintain composure. Longevity in such a volatile environment required constant adaptation. Ultimately, this phase of life highlights a stark reality: influence achieved in secrecy is inherently unstable. The skills that enable it are valuable, but the context is precarious. Corozzo's discipline, patience, and foresight ensured survival, but they also underscore that true stability comes from lawful, transparent choices. In any system, longevity requires both adaptability and ethical awareness. The lesson emerges clearly: intelligence, restraint, and strategy are essential tools, but they achieve their greatest value when applied in ways that foster safety, legitimacy, and growth. Influence in shadows may appear impressive, yet the most enduring power is built without fear, secrecy, or compromise of moral integrity. Quiet observation, careful planning, and ethical foresight create outcomes that endure far beyond the ephemeral control of transient shadows. The passage of time brings clarity, even in the most shadowed corners. Joseph Corozzo understood this as he navigated an environment where every choice mattered. Influence was cumulative, built through countless small decisions rather than dramatic gestures. Each interaction carried weight, and over time, patterns emerged that others recognized, even if only subconsciously. This quiet accumulation of respect and authority was his signature, unseen, uncelebrated, but undeniably effective. Urban life, with its relentless energy, masked the subtleties of control. To the casual observer, power seemed tied to bold acts or public notoriety. Corozzo's reality was different. It was measured, strategic, and largely invisible. He understood that the illusion of activity often distracted from the importance of foresight. By observing, analyzing, and anticipating, he maintained influence without creating waves that could attract unwanted attention. The importance of timing cannot be overstated. In volatile networks, acting too quickly invites mistakes, while hesitation can signal weakness. Corozzo mastered this delicate balance. He knew when to intervene, when to wait, and when to allow situations to resolve themselves. This skill minimized conflict and allowed outcomes to align with long-term objectives. His ability to navigate these nuances distinguished him from peers who relied solely on aggression or impulsive action. Financial and operational matters demanded similar care. Cash flows, transactions, and obligations had to be managed with precision. Corozzo preferred methods that limited visibility and simplified risk. In doing so, he demonstrated that restraint often surpassed boldness in effectiveness. The most powerful strategies were those that left little trace, avoided scrutiny, and preserved stability over time. Trust remained central to his influence. It was not earned overnight, and once broken, it was difficult to restore. Corozzo prioritized reliability, consistency, and discretion. By honoring agreements and maintaining confidentiality, he cultivated a network that relied on him as a stabilizing force. This reputation created leverage. Others deferred to him not through fear, but through recognition of competence and foresight. The psychological landscape of his environment was intense. Constant awareness, rapid assessment of threats, and mental agility were necessary for survival. Corozzo honed these abilities meticulously. He learned to identify subtle changes in demeanor, inconsistencies in speech, and minor behavioral shifts that signaled emerging risks. Anticipating potential problems allowed him to act before situations escalated, often neutralizing threats before they became visible to others. Public perception of organized crime often glamorized violence and power. Reality was far less glamorous. Long-term success required patience, discipline, and emotional control. Corozzo's approach emphasized mental strength and strategic thought over physical dominance. This distinction allowed him to endure in a world where others succumbed to recklessness, impulsivity, or excessive exposure. The internal dynamics of networks were constantly evolving. New participants, changing loyalties, and external pressures created an unpredictable landscape. Corozzo's strategy relied on observation and adaptation. He assessed relationships, evaluated motives, and acted in ways that preserved balance. This approach minimized conflict, maintained alliances, and ensured continuity of influence, even as the environment shifted. Ethical reflection emerges naturally in reviewing this life. The abilities that allowed Corozzo to survive and thrive: critical thinking, negotiation, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence have immense value in lawful contexts. Applied legally, these skills can generate growth, security, and opportunity without the inherent danger and societal harm associated with illicit activity. His story, therefore, serves as a cautionary tale and an educational example of human capability misapplied. The cost of secrecy was significant. Relationships outside trusted networks were limited. Genuine intimacy was rare, and emotional vulnerability was a liability. Corozzo managed this tension by compartmentalizing his personal and professional spheres. While effective for survival, this strategy reinforced solitude, a recurring trade-off for those navigating high-risk environments. Crises were inevitable. External pressures from law enforcement, rival factions, and unpredictable events demanded constant vigilance. Corozzo approached each challenge methodically. His interventions were deliberate, calculated, and aimed at mitigating risk. By resolving potential conflicts early, he preserved stability for both himself and his associates. This proactive approach solidified his reputation as a stabilizing presence. Adapting to changing circumstances was critical. Strategies that had once been effective became outdated as legal, social, and technological factors evolved. Corozzo demonstrated flexibility, adjusting methods to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. This adaptability was not reactive but anticipatory, guided by experience and foresight. Ultimately, the lessons of this period emphasized the fragility of influence when built on secrecy. Skills like strategic thinking, patience, and discipline are powerful, Yet their application within harmful systems prolongs risk rather than creating enduring security. Real stability and authority arise from lawful, transparent action, where influence can persist without fear of immediate reprisal. The chapter closes with a reflection. Intelligence and foresight are invaluable tools, but their greatest potential is realized when applied to constructive, legitimate pursuits. The capacity to analyze, anticipate, and act decisively is not inherently good or bad. It is the context and purpose that define its value. True strength lies in making choices that create enduring safety, opportunity, and personal growth, rather than relying on shadows and secrecy for survival. In the constant flux of urban life, Joseph Corozzo's existence was defined by subtlety and calculation. Power did not announce itself with grand gestures. It unfolded through measured decisions, strategic observation, and quiet influence. His reputation was built on a careful balance of discretion and reliability, and those who encountered him gradually recognized the authority embedded in his presence. This authority did not rely on intimidation alone. It rested on credibility and the assurance that his interventions were thoughtful, deliberate, and enduring. Communication was a key instrument of his influence. Words were chosen with care, often minimal yet loaded with meaning. In a world where missteps could trigger cascading consequences, precision in speech mattered immensely. Corozzo mastered the art of conveying intentions without excess. Each conversation, each directive, and each subtle gesture was calculated to minimize risk and maximize stability. The ability to guide outcomes quietly became a hallmark of his approach. Decision-making followed a disciplined methodology. He considered consequences in multiple dimensions: immediate, intermediate, and long-term. The ripple effect of any action could affect relationships, finances, and safety. By evaluating these variables, Corozzo often neutralized potential conflicts before they materialized. His foresight and methodical planning made him indispensable to those navigating a similarly volatile environment. Financial matters required equal care. Cash and resources circulated through many channels, and oversight was constant. Corozzo favored simplicity and transparency within his inner operations while maintaining discretion outwardly. Overcomplication invited scrutiny, and even minor irregularities could be exploited by rivals or authorities. His approach was not about amassing wealth rapidly but ensuring sustainability and security over decades. The social dynamics surrounding him were intricate. Loyalty and trust were earned slowly and could be destroyed instantly. Corozzo cultivated relationships carefully, recognizing the long-term value of alliances and the fragility of reputation. He managed disputes delicately, reframing disagreements to reduce friction and maintain cohesion. This method strengthened the network, its resilience, while subtly expanding his influence without overt assertion. Psychologically, the environment demanded constant awareness. Corozzo developed a keen sense of observation, noting shifts in demeanor, tone, and pattern. These insights allowed him to predict emerging issues and intervene before they escalated. Emotional regulation was essential. Impulsivity could lead to mistakes, and misjudgment carried severe consequences. Patience became a powerful tool, enabling him to navigate tensions effectively and consistently. External pressures continued to evolve. Law enforcement agencies refined strategies, employing surveillance, analysis, and long-term investigations. Criminal networks were increasingly vulnerable to infiltration and prosecution. Corozzo adapted by minimizing exposure, maintaining low profiles, and emphasizing operational security. His understanding of these changing dynamics allowed him to preserve stability even as the landscape became more challenging. Despite cultural depictions of glamour, the day-to-day reality was demanding. Most work involved planning, observation, and negotiation rather than dramatic confrontations. Stress was a constant companion, arising from the need for vigilance and the ever-present threat of disruption. Corozzo thrived in this environment because of his analytical mind, resilience, and commitment to strategic foresight. Generational shifts introduced additional complexity. Younger participants often sought rapid advancement, sometimes at the expense of caution. Their actions increased exposure and risk. Corozzo mitigated the factors by mentoring selectively and limiting association with reckless actors. His approach prioritized continuity and stability, ensuring that influence was maintained without unnecessary hazards. Ethical reflection is inevitable when considering this period. The skills that allowed Corozzo to thrive: foresight, Negotiation, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence could have been applied to lawful, productive endeavors. Within illicit systems, they ensured survival and influence but carried societal cost. His story underscores the duality of human capability. Talent can either create value or perpetuate harm, depending on context and purpose. Secrecy imposed a personal cost. Genuine intimacy was rare and trust was tightly guarded. Corozzo compartmentalized personal and professional spheres, a necessity for survival but a source of isolation. This balance between protection and emotional distance remained a recurring theme in his life, illustrating the trade-offs inherent in high-risk environments. Crisis management was a continuous practice. External threats, internal disputes, and unexpected developments demanded calculated intervention. Corozzo approached challenges analytically, often resolving issues before they became public or violent. This proactive strategy reinforced his reputation as a stabilizing force and demonstrated the value of calm, strategic thinking in high-pressure contexts. Adaptation was crucial. Methods effective at one time became liabilities in another. Corozzo adjusted continuously, refining strategies to maintain influence while minimizing risk. This adaptability distinguished him from less disciplined peers, allowing him to endure while others faltered. Ultimately, this period illustrates the limits of influence built on secrecy. Skills like patience, strategic thinking, and foresight are invaluable, but their full potential is realized only when applied constructively. Real authority and stability emerge from lawful, transparent, rather than fear or concealment. Survival in shadows may be impressive, but enduring strength comes from choices that foster safety, legitimacy, and sustainable growth. The chapter concludes with a reflection. Intelligence, discipline, and insight are powerful tools. Their value is defined not by the environment in which they are applied, but by the purpose they serve. The most enduring influence comes from actions aligned with ethical principles, creating a life that is secure, productive, and free from the constant burden of secrecy and risk. In the rhythm of city life, where millions moved without noticing the subtleties of power, Joseph Corozzo's influence grew through precision, patience, and observation. Authority did not announce itself. It emerged in the careful orchestration of choices, the quiet resolution of disputes, and the consistency of action. Those around him gradually recognized a pattern. His interventions were rarely rushed, his judgments rarely flawed, and his presence silently guided outcomes toward balance and stability. Daily operations required meticulous attention. Transactions, communications, and alliances all carried risk. Corozzo navigated these challenges by emphasizing clarity, simplicity, and discretion. Each decision was weighed for immediate effect and potential ripple consequences. Errors could be costly, attracting attention from rivals or law enforcement. By controlling variables and anticipating outcomes, he minimized exposure while maximizing influence. Interpersonal dynamics were central to his strategy. Trust, loyalty, and reputation formed the foundation of networks. Corozzo earned respect by honoring commitments, managing conflicts quietly, and providing guidance when needed. He avoided unnecessary confrontation, recognizing that conflict often weakened structures and drew unwanted attention. By maintaining stability, he became a figure others deferred to naturally. Without coercion, the psychological demands were relentless. Awareness of subtle behavioral cues, evaluation of motives, and anticipation of reactions were constant responsibilities. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to act before crisis developed, often diffusing potential violence or disagreement. This proactive style of management reinforced his reputation as reliable and competent, emphasizing strategic intelligence over brute force. Financial operations required careful balance. Large movements attracted scrutiny, while overcomplication created vulnerability. Corozzo prioritized sustainability and discretion, ensuring that resources were managed in ways that supported long-term stability. Patience rather than rapid gain became a hallmark of his method. In an environment driven by risk, restraint was often the most powerful tool. Generational changes introduced additional complexities. Younger participants frequently sought quick recognition, creating instability and exposure. Corozzo navigated these dynamics by providing subtle guidance or limiting engagement with impulsive actors. This approach preserved operational integrity and reduced unnecessary risk. Discipline and foresight differentiated him from those who relied on recklessness or immediate gratification. Law enforcement pressures evolved continuously. Surveillance, informants, and sophisticated financial investigations demanded constant vigilance. Corozzo adapted by limiting visibility, streamlining operations, and emphasizing security. Understanding these external factors allowed him to maintain influence while avoiding the pitfalls that claimed many of his contemporaries. Ethical reflection is inherent in examining such a life. Skills like negotiation, strategic planning, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence are universally valuable. Within the legal systems, they enable survival and influence, but at societal cost. Applied to legitimate contexts, these same abilities can create security, opportunity, and growth. Corozzo's story demonstrates how talent can be misapplied when circumstances or choices divert it toward harmful systems. Isolation was a recurring consequence of secrecy. Personal relationships outside trusted networks were limited, and emotional vulnerability carried risk. Corozzo managed this tension through compartmentalization, ensuring focus on professional responsibilities while protecting personal well-being. This approach, while effective for safety, reinforced solitude and limited deeper connection. Crisis management was an ongoing necessity. External threats, shifting loyalties, and unforeseen events required measured responses. Corozzo addressed each challenge analytically, diffusing potential problems before escalation. His proactive interventions reduced exposure and preserved stability, underscoring the value of a careful observation and strategic foresight. Adaptation was critical. Methods that were once effective became liabilities as circumstances shifted. Corozzo continuously refined his approach, adjusting strategies to maintain influence without attracting undue attention. Flexibility and anticipation were more valuable than aggression or force, ensuring both survival and continuity of authority. Ultimately, this stage of his life illustrates the limits of influence achieved in secrecy. While intelligence, patience, and foresight are powerful tools, their greatest utility comes from constructive and lawful application. Real stability and authority arise from transparency, ethical behavior, and deliberate choice, rather than concealment or fear. This chapter closes with a reflection. Intelligence and strategic discipline are essential, but their value is defined by context and purpose. Enduring influence comes not from intimidation or secrecy, but from actions aligned with ethical principles, fostering safety, resilience, and growth. True power is measured not by control over others and shadows, but by the capacity to create security, opportunity, and stability in the open. Guided by foresight and responsibility, the true measure of influence often lies in restraint, and Joseph Corozzo embodied this principle throughout his life. In a world driven by perception, visibility, and action, he understood that the most powerful impact could be made quietly. Authority did not require a display of strength. It manifested in the consistency of decisions, the integrity of communication, and the reliability with which obligations were met. Over time, these qualities cultivated respect and deference, often more enduring than that achieved through force or notoriety. Every day presented new challenges. Relationships were complex, involving a web of loyalty, obligation, and competition. Corozzo approached each interaction with careful observation, analyzing motives, assessing potential risks, and determining the optimal response. This analytical approach allowed him to navigate volatile situations without provoking conflict. Others recognized his judgment and sought his counsel, often unaware of how subtly he shaped outcomes. Financial oversight was equally critical. Transactions needed to be discreet, efficient, and accountable within the context of risk. Corozzo valued steady, sustainable methods over rapid accumulation. By managing resources conservatively and avoiding attention, he ensured long-term operational stability. The principle was clear: slow, deliberate growth protected both assets and reputation, whereas rapid gains often invited scrutiny and peril. Communication was never casual. Every word, pause, and gesture carried potential consequences. Corozzo mastered this subtle language, conveying intentions effectively while minimizing exposure. His sonnets often spoke louder than the words of others, allowing him to influence decisions without direct intervention. This indirect method of control reinforced his reputation as a stabilizing presence within networks. The psychological environment demanded constant vigilance. Observing behavior, reading subtle signals, and predicting responses became second nature. Corozzo relied on this acumen to prevent escalation and guide outcomes. Emotional control was critical. Impulsive reactions could compromise long-term objectives. Patience and foresight allowed him to act strategically, preserving both safety and influence. Generational shifts added complexity to the network. Younger participants often pursued quick recognition or immediate gain, creating potential instability. Corozzo mitigated these risks through guidance, selective engagement, and by modeling disciplined behavior. This approach preserved continuity, reinforced stability, and allowed him to maintain a steady influence despite evolving dynamics. Legal pressures intensified over time. Surveillance, investigative techniques, and long-term scrutiny required constant adaptation. Corozzo emphasized operational security, minimized visibility, and anticipated enforcement strategies. By understanding the broader landscape, he remained effective and resilient, even as the external environment became more challenging. The human cost of secrecy was profound. Personal relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional intimacy was rare. Corozzo compartmentalized his life to protect both himself and his network, balancing operational demands with personal well-being. This isolation was both a safeguard and a burden, highlighting the trade-offs inherent in high-stakes, high-risk environments. Crisis management became a central skill. Unpredictable events, disputes, and external threats required rapid yet measured response. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to address emerging problems early, often diffusing tension before escalation. This proactive strategy reinforced his authority and ensured that influence remained intact without resorting to overt displays of power. Adaptation was essential. Techniques that succeeded in one era could become liabilities in another. Corozzo refined methods continuously, anticipating changes and adjusting strategies accordingly. Flexibility, rather than aggression, became the key to enduring influence. By emphasizing foresight over reaction, he maintained stability and authority in a landscape defined by uncertainty. Ethically, this period illustrates the dual potential of human skill. Intelligence, patience, and strategic acumen are universally valuable, yet their application in harmful systems prolongs risk and consequences. Corozzo's story demonstrates how talent can be misapplied, creating influence and survival at the expense of broader societal well-being. When redirected toward lawful endeavors, these same traits could foster growth, security, and positive impact. Ultimately, true power is measured not by control over others in shadows, but by the ability to navigate complex circumstances with integrity, foresight, and restraint. Corozzo's life reflects the subtle art of influence, patient, disciplined, and carefully calibrated to preserve stability while minimizing exposure. It demonstrates that authority built on consistency, discretion, and ethical awareness is far more enduring than that derived from intimidation or spectacle. Influence is rarely loud. Joseph Corozzo understood this principle deeply, navigating a world where perception often outweighed reality. True authority in such a context came from patience, consistency, and the quiet calibration of action. Rather than asserting dominance through overt force or spectacle, he relied on reliability, discretion, and the careful anticipation of consequences. Those around him gradually recognized his presence as stabilizing, understanding that outcomes often reflected his guidance without overt acknowledgement. Every day presented complex decisions. Relationships, obligations, and rivalries formed a dynamic network that required constant attention. Corozzo approached each interaction analytically, weighing risks, evaluating motives, and considering potential ripple effects. By managing these factors meticulously, he minimized conflict and maximized stability. The subtlety of this influence often went unnoticed, yet its impact was profound. Financial operations were executed with similar care. Large, conspicuous movements were avoided in favor of consistent, low-risk management. Corozzo recognized that slow, deliberate strategies preserved both assets and operational integrity. In an environment where exposure could be catastrophic, restraint was as valuable as action. Sustainability became the guiding principle, balancing resource management with risk mitigation. Communication was carefully controlled. Every word, gesture, and pause carried potential consequences. Corozzo mastered this language of subtlety, guiding outcomes indirectly while reducing exposure. His silence often spoke more powerfully than the declarations of others, creating influence without confrontation. In a world where impulsivity could provoke crisis, measured communication became a defining characteristic of his authority. The psychological demands of this environment were relentless. Observing nuances in behavior, Assessing intentions and anticipating reaction required continuous attention. Corozzo developed a heightened awareness of subtle cues, allowing him to intervene before conflicts escalated. Emotional regulation was essential, ensuring that decisions were guided by strategy rather than impulse. This disciplined approach preserved both safety and credibility. Generational dynamics added further complexity. New participants often sought immediate recognition and rapid advancement, increasing exposure and risk. Corozzo mitigated these challenges through guidance, mentorship, and selective engagement. By modeling disciplined behavior and limiting association with impulsive actors, he maintained stability and continuity, reinforcing his reputation as a steadying presence. Legal and societal pressures continued to intensify. Advanced surveillance, forensic methods, and investigative strategies required constant adaptation. Corozzo emphasized operational security, minimized visibility, and anticipated enforcement approaches. This proactive strategy enabled him to maintain influence while reducing vulnerability, underscoring the importance of foresight and adaptability in volatile environments. The human cost of secrecy remained high. Personal relationships were limited, trust was carefully allocated, and emotional vulnerability carried risk. Corozzo compartmentalized personal and professional spheres, balancing operational demands with personal well-being. While this strategy protected him and his network, it also reinforced solitude, a recurring consequence of life in high-risk, high-stakes environments. Crisis management became routine. Unexpected developments ranging from internal disputes to external threats required prompt yet measured responses. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to anticipate outcomes, neutralize potential conflicts, and preserve operational stability. This proactive methodology reinforced his influence, demonstrating that true authority often lies in prevention rather than reaction. Adaptation was crucial. Strategies that worked in one context could become liabilities in another. Corozzo continuously refined methods, anticipating change and adjusting operations accordingly. Flexibility, rather than aggression, defined his enduring success. By emphasizing foresight and restraint, he maintained authority even as the external landscape evolved. Ethically, his experience illustrates the dual potential of human capability. Skills such as strategic thinking, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are powerful tools. When applied to unlawful systems, they sustain survival and influence at societal cost. Redirected toward constructive, lawful pursuits, these same traits can generate security, opportunity, and long-term growth. Corozzo's story thus serves as both cautionary and educational, demonstrating the consequences of skill misapplied. Ultimately, the chapter underscores a critical lesson. True influence is not measured by visible control or intimidation, but by the capacity to navigate complexity with intelligence, foresight, and ethical consideration. Authority achieved in shadows may appear impressive, but enduring power arises from consistent, principled action. The ability to create stability, resilience, and opportunity through thoughtful, disciplined choices defines the most lasting form of influence. The chapter concludes with reflection. Intelligence and strategy are valuable, but their greatest impact emerges when applied responsibly. Patient, disciplined, and ethically guided action cultivates influence that is both effective and sustainable, allowing one to navigate challenges without reliance on fear, secrecy, or coercion. In this measured approach lies the truest form of power, a quiet strength built on foresight, awareness, and ethical reflection. Influence often grows silently, shaped by consistent action and careful judgment rather than force. Joseph Corozzo exemplified this principle, moving through a world where decisions had long-reaching consequences. His authority was not loud or dramatic, it was measured, deliberate, and deeply rooted in an understanding of both people and circumstance. Those around him came to recognize that outcomes often reflected his influence, even when his presence was subtle or unseen. The complexity of daily operations required constant attention. Relationships, obligations, and potential conflicts formed an intricate web that demanded analysis and foresight. Corozzo approached each situation strategically, considering multiple perspectives and potential consequences. This careful evaluation allowed him to minimize risk while maintaining control. The subtlety of his approach ensured that he could guide events without confrontation, creating stability where volatility threatened. Financial management was equally critical. Transactions needed to be executed with discretion, balancing the need for operational efficiency with the imperative to avoid scrutiny. Corozzo favored consistency and sustainability over rapid accumulation. In an environment where exposure could have severe repercussions, restraint was a key asset. The principle of measured growth provided both security and operational longevity. Communication was a tool of influence. Every word, gesture, and pause carried significance. Corozzo mastered the art of conveying intentions and directly guiding outcomes while maintaining minimal exposure. Silence became a powerful instrument, often communicating more than words alone. This strategic use of communication reinforced his reputation as a stabilizing and reliable figure. The psychological demands of such a life were immense. Awareness of subtle cues, analysis of behavior, and prediction of responses required continual vigilance. Corozzo cultivated acute observational skills, enabling him to act before conflicts escalated. Emotional control was essential. Impulsivity could compromise decisions and endanger both himself and his associates. Patience, foresight, and calculated intervention defined his operational style. Generational dynamics introduced additional complexity. Younger associates often sought rapid advancement and recognition, creating instability and potential risk. Corozzo managed these challenges through guidance, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. His approach ensured continuity, reinforced stability, and maintained his influence within the network despite evolving circumstances. Legal pressures were constantly evolving. Surveillance, informants, and sophisticated investigations required careful adaptation. Corozzo emphasized security and minimized exposure, and anticipated enforcement strategies. By understanding the broader environment, he was able to navigate threats proactively, preserving both authority and operational integrity. Secrecy imposed personal costs. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional intimacy was rare. Corozzo compartmentalized his professional and personal life, balancing operational responsibilities with well-being. This strategy, while protective, contributed to solitude and reinforced the isolating nature of high-stakes environments. Crisis management became routine. Unanticipated developments, whether internal disputes, rival pressures, or external threats, required measured and timely responses. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to intervene before situations escalated, preserving stability and demonstrating the power of foresight and discipline. Proactive problem-solving became a hallmark of his authority. Adaptation was critical. Tactics that were effective at one time could become liabilities later. Corozzo continuously refined methods, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to maintain influence without increasing exposure. Flexibility and strategic thinking proved more valuable than aggression, ensuring resilience and long-term effectiveness. Ethically, his experience underscores a fundamental truth. Intelligence, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are inherently valuable skills. When misapplied within unlawful frameworks, they sustain survival and influence at societal cost. Redirected toward lawful pursuits, the same skills can create opportunity, security, and lasting growth. Corozzo's story offers insight into the dual potential of human capability and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, this chapter highlights that true power lies in the ability to navigate complexity with wisdom, patience, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may appear formidable, but enduring authority is cultivated through consistent, principled action. The capacity to create stability, resilience, and opportunity through disciplined choice is the essence of lasting power. The chapter concludes with a reflection. Intelligence, foresight, and strategic discipline are potent, but their greatest value emerges when applied responsibly. Patient, ethical, and deliberate action fosters influence that is both effective and sustainable, allowing one to navigate challenges confidently while avoiding the pitfalls of secrecy, coercion, or fear-based authority. The measure of authority is often revealed not in moments of drama but in the quiet orchestration of circumstances. Joseph Corozzo exemplified this principle, exercising influence in ways that were subtle, deliberate, and deeply effective. His approach was rooted in observation, foresight, and patience, qualities that allowed him to guide events and shape outcomes without reliance on spectacle or force. Over time, this consistency fostered respect and deference, even among peers who might otherwise have challenged his position. Every interaction carried potential significance. Relationships, obligations, and rivalries formed a complex web, each connection requiring careful attention. Corozzo evaluated each situation, assessing motives, anticipating responses, and considering the potential ripple effects of every decision. By analyzing these variables, he could prevent conflict, mitigate risk, and maintain stability, demonstrating that influence is as much about restraint as it is about action. Financial management required similar precision. Large, conspicuous movements attracted scrutiny, while overly complex operations invited error. Corozzo emphasized consistent, measured approaches, prioritizing long-term stability over rapid gains. His disciplined management reduced exposure and created a foundation for enduring influence. Patience and meticulous planning became defining characteristics of his strategy. Communication functioned as both tool and shield. Words, gestures, and silences were carefully calibrated, conveying meaning without increasing vulnerability. Corozzo mastered the art of guiding decisions indirectly, allowing others to follow paths shaped subtly by his judgment. His quiet authority demonstrated that effective influence often operates below the surface, unseen yet profoundly impactful. The psychological demands of this life were constant, observing nuances in behavior, interpreting subtle signals, and predicting possible outcomes required vigilance and mental discipline. Corozzo developed a keen awareness of both verbal and nonverbal cues, enabling him to act preemptively rather than reactively. Emotional control ensured that decisions were informed by logic and foresight, not impulse or fear. Generational shifts within networks presented additional challenges. Younger participants frequently sought recognition or rapid advancement, creating opportunities for error or instability. Corozzo mitigated these risks by offering subtle guidance, modeling disciplined behavior, and limiting interaction with impulsive actors. His approach ensured operational continuity, reinforced stability, and preserved his reputation as a reliable and stabilizing figure. Legal pressures intensified over time. Advanced surveillance techniques, financial investigations, and long-term monitoring required constant adaptation. Corozzo minimized exposure through operational security, careful planning, and anticipation of potential enforcement strategies. His foresight allowed him to maintain authority and effectiveness despite increasing scrutiny. Secrecy, while protective, imposed personal costs. Relationship outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional vulnerability was fraught with risk. Corozzo compartmentalized his personal and professional life, ensuring focus on operational responsibilities while safeguarding his well-being. This isolation, though necessary, reinforced the solitary nature of his existence. Crisis management became an ongoing necessity. Unanticipated events, from internal disputes to external threats, required immediate yet measured responses. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to address problems before they escalated, preserving stability and maintaining influence. This proactive problem-solving became a hallmark of his leadership, demonstrating that real authority is exercised through foresight rather than reaction. Adaptation remained essential. Techniques effective at one point in time could become liabilities as circumstances changed. Corozzo continuously refined his methods, anticipating shifts in environment and behavior to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, strategy, and disciplined execution distinguished him from peers who relied on aggression or short-term gains. Ethically, his experience underscores a central lesson: the skills that enable success, strategic thinking, negotiation, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence have immense value. Within unlawful systems, they ensure survival and influence but carry societal cost. Applied to legitimate endeavors, they create opportunity, security, and lasting impact. Corozzo's life highlights both the power of human capability and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, the chapter emphasizes that true power arises from navigating complexity with patience, intelligence, and ethical awareness. Influence built on secrecy may seem formidable, but lasting authority comes from consistent, principled action. The capacity to foster stability, resilience, and opportunity through thoughtful, disciplined choices defines enduring power. The chapter closes with reflection. Intelligence, strategy, and foresight are tools of extraordinary potential. Their greatest impact is realized when applied responsibly, creating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically sound. Quiet, measured authority, grounded in discipline and awareness, represents the truest form of power, one that outlasts fleeting displays of control and leaves a legacy of resilience and wisdom. In a world driven by perception and subtle influence, Joseph Corozzo's power was forged not through spectacle, but through consistent, measured action. Authority was revealed in the quiet orchestration of circumstances, the disciplined anticipation of outcomes, and the thoughtful resolution of conflict. Those who interacted with him gradually recognized a pattern. Decisions were deliberate, interventions precise, and guidance often invisible but profoundly effective. Influence, in his case, was both quiet and enduring. Each day presented a complex array of challenges. Interpersonal dynamics, obligations, and the constant potential for dispute required continuous observation and evaluation. Corozzo approached every situation with strategic analysis, considering motives, consequences, and the ripple effect of each choice. By acting preemptively and avoiding unnecessary confrontation, he maintained stability and minimized risk, demonstrating that restraint and foresight often outweigh aggression in achieving sustainable authority. Financial oversight demanded similar discipline. Large transactions attracted attention, while overcomplicated operations increased vulnerability. Corozzo prioritized consistent, low-risk management that emphasized long-term stability. The principle of measured growth protected both assets and reputation. In an environment where exposure could have serious consequences, patience and planning became central tools for survival and influence. Communication was an essential instrument. Words, gestures, and silences carried meaning and potential consequence. Corozzo mastered the subtlety of conveying guidance indirectly, influencing decisions without overt assertion. His quiet authority allowed others to act in alignment with his strategic vision while maintaining operational security. The power of silence and careful communication reinforced his credibility and control. The psychological demands of his life were constant. Observation of behavior, assessment of motives, and prediction of outcomes required heightened awareness. Corozzo developed the capacity to recognize subtle changes, anticipate risks, and intervene before situations escalated. Emotional control was essential. Impulsive reactions could compromise both safety and influence. Patience and foresight became defining characteristics of his operational style. Generational changes within networks presented additional challenges. Younger associates often sought rapid recognition or immediate rewards, increasing exposure and instability. Corozzo navigated these dynamics by providing guidance selectively, modeling disciplined behavior, and limiting association with impulsive individuals. This approach preserved stability, reinforced continuity, and maintained his influence amid evolving circumstances. Legal pressures intensified with time. Surveillance, informants, and investigative techniques required constant adaptation. Corozzo minimized visibility, emphasized security, and anticipated enforcement strategies. His proactive foresight allowed him to navigate threats effectively, preserving authority and operational integrity despite mounting scrutiny. Secrecy, while protective, exacted a personal toll. Relationships outside trusted networks were limited, and emotional vulnerability carried risk. Corozzo compartmentalized his life, balancing professional demands with personal well-being. This isolation, necessary for safety, reinforced the solitary nature of his existence, illustrating the personal sacrifices inherent in high-stakes environments. Crisis management became routine. Unanticipated events, internal disagreements, external pressures, or sudden threats required measured intervention. Corozzo addressed these situations analytically, diffusing potential conflicts before they escalated. This proactive approach reinforced his authority and demonstrated that enduring influence is exercised through foresight and strategic planning rather than reactionary force. Adaptation was critical. Strategies that were effective in one context could become liabilities in another. Corozzo continuously refined methods, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, strategic thinking, and disciplined execution ensured resilience and long-term effectiveness. Ethically, his experience highlights the dual potential of human skill. Negotiation, strategic planning, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are inherently valuable. When applied in unlawful contexts, they preserve survival and influence, but at societal cost. Redirected toward constructive, lawful endeavors, these same skills generate security, opportunity, and lasting impact. Corozzo's life illustrates both the potential of human capability and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes that true power lies in navigating complexity with patience, intelligence, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may appear formidable, but enduring authority is built on consistent, principled action. The ability to foster stability, resilience, and opportunity through thoughtful, disciplined choice defines lasting power. The chapter closes with reflection. Intelligence, strategy, and foresight are powerful tools. Their greatest potential is realized when applied responsibly, creating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically grounded. Quiet, deliberate authority, exercised with awareness and discipline, represents the truest form of power, outlasting fleeting displays of control and leaving a legacy of resilience, prudence, and wisdom. Authority is often exercised not through visibility but through subtle orchestration, and Joseph Corozzo understood this principle deeply. His influence was shaped by patience, strategic foresight, and careful observation. Decisions were calculated, interventions discreet, and guidance often invisible to outsiders, yet their impact was profound. Over time, this quiet consistency cultivated respect, trust, and deference, revealing the depth of his power without the need for spectacle or aggression. Daily life required constant vigilance. Relationships, obligations, and potential conflicts created a dynamic network that demanded attention and thoughtful evaluation. Corozzo approached each interaction strategically, weighing motives, anticipating consequences, and predicting ripple effects. This disciplined approach allowed him to minimize risk, maintain stability, and resolve issues before they could escalate, demonstrating that restraint and foresight often surpass overt action in sustaining influence. Financial operations required similar precision. Large, conspicuous transactions invited scrutiny, while complexity increased vulnerability. Corozzo favored consistent, measured approaches that prioritized long-term stability over rapid gain. By exercising patience and meticulous planning, he ensured that both resources and reputation were protected. In environments where exposure carried high stakes, deliberate management became a defining principle of operational success. Communication was a powerful tool. Every word, gesture, and pause was considered for its potential effect. Corozzo mastered the subtle art of influencing decisions indirectly, guiding outcomes without drawing attention. His silence often conveyed more than the words of others, reinforcing credibility and authority while maintaining discretion. The ability to shape outcomes quietly became a hallmark of his influence. The psychological demands of this life were continuous. Observing minute shifts in behavior, interpreting intentions, and anticipating responses required acute mental discipline. Corozzo cultivated these skills to act preemptively rather than reactively, diffusing potential conflicts before they escalated. Emotional control was essential. Impulsivity could undermine strategy and jeopardize both personal and operational security. Patience, foresight, and calculated intervention defined his operational methodology. Generational changes within networks created additional complexity. Younger associates often sought immediate recognition or quick advancement, which could destabilize operations. Corozzo mitigated these risks through mentorship, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. This approach reinforced stability, maintained continuity, and ensured his influence endured across shifting circumstances. Legal and external pressures intensified over time. Surveillance, investigative methods, and monitoring strategies necessitated constant adaptation. Corozzo emphasized operational security, minimized exposure, and anticipated potential enforcement actions. Proactive planning allowed him to maintain authority and effectiveness despite increasing scrutiny and risk. The demands of secrecy exacted personal costs. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional intimacy carried inherent risk. Corozzo compartmentalized personal and professional life, balancing operational responsibilities with well-being. While protective, this approach contributed to isolation, underscoring the personal sacrifices required for long-term survival in high-stakes environments. Crisis management was a continuous responsibility. Unanticipated events, ranging from internal disputes to external pressures, required measured, timely response. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to intervene early, reducing tension and maintaining stability. Proactive problem-solving reinforced his authority and demonstrated that enduring influence is exercised through foresight rather than reaction. Adaptation remained essential. Methods effective at one time could become liabilities as circumstances evolved. Corozzo refined strategies continuously, anticipating change and adjusting operations to sustain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, strategic insight, and disciplined execution ensured resilience and long-term success. Ethically, his experience emphasizes the dual potential of skill. Strategic thinking, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are powerful tools. Within unlawful frameworks, they preserve survival and influence at societal cost. Redirected toward lawful endeavors, these same abilities create opportunity, security, and lasting impact. Corozzo's life illustrates the consequences of misapplied talent and the potential of skill applied responsibly. Ultimately, this chapter highlights that true power lies in navigating complexity with intelligence, patience, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved through secrecy may seem formidable, but lasting authority is cultivated through consistent, principled action. The ability to foster stability, resilience, and opportunity through deliberate, disciplined choice defines enduring power. The chapter closes with reflection. Foresight, strategy, and disciplined intelligence are tools of immense value. Their highest potential is realized when applied responsibly, cultivating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically sound. Quiet, measured authority, exercised with awareness and discipline, represents the truest form of power, leaving a legacy of resilience, prudence, and wisdom that extends far beyond fleeting displays of control. In the intricate landscape of influence, Joseph Corozzo's mastery was defined by subtlety and foresight. Power, he knew, was less about visible displays and more about the careful orchestration of circumstances. His authority emerged through consistent, disciplined action, strategic decision-making, and the quiet resolution of challenges. Those around him recognized this pattern over time. His guidance was reliable, his interventions precise, and his presence stabilizing, even when unobserved. Daily operations were complex. Interpersonal dynamics, obligations, and the potential for disputes created a web requiring constant attention and thoughtful evaluation. Corozzo approached each direction analytically, considering motives, predicting outcomes, and weighing consequences. By anticipating potential issues and acting preemptively, he minimized conflict and maintained operational stability. This measured approach demonstrated that restraint and foresight are often more effective than overt action in sustaining influence. Financial management was approached with equal care. Large, conspicuous transactions attracted attention, and overly complex operations introduced risk. Corozzo emphasized consistency, discretion, and long-term stability over rapid gains. By managing resources deliberately and patiently, he protected both assets and reputation. In an environment where exposure carried significant consequences, methodical planning was as critical as decisive action. Communication functioned as both a tool and a shield. Words, gestures, and pauses were carefully calibrated to convey intentions without creating vulnerability. Corozzo mastered the art of indirect influence, guiding decisions and shaping outcomes while maintaining discretion. Silence often communicated more than speech, reinforcing his authority without drawing unnecessary attention. This subtle form of guidance proved consistently effective. The psychological demands of this environment were constant. Observing nuanced behavior, interpreting subtle cues, and anticipating reactions required heightened awareness and mental discipline. Corozzo developed these skills to act preemptively, diffusing potential conflicts before they escalated. Emotional control was essential. Impulsive reactions could undermine strategy and compromise safety. Patience and foresight were defining elements of his operational methodology. Generational shifts within networks introduced additional challenges. Younger associates often pursued immediate recognition or rapid advancement, increasing risk and potential instability. Corozzo managed these dynamics through mentorship, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. His guidance preserved stability, reinforced continuity, and ensured his influence endured even as circumstances evolved. Legal and societal pressures intensified over time. Advanced surveillance, investigative methods, and monitoring required continuous adaptation. Corozzo prioritized operational security, minimized exposure, and anticipated enforcement strategies. Proactive planning allowed him to navigate threats effectively, maintaining authority and operational integrity despite increasing scrutiny. Secrecy, though protective, imposed personal costs. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional vulnerability carried inherent risk. Corozzo compartmentalized his personal and professional life, balancing operational demands with personal well-being. While this strategy ensured security, it reinforced the isolation and solitude inherent in high-stakes environments. Crisis management became a constant responsibility. Unanticipated developments, whether internal disputes, external threats, or sudden events, required prompt yet measured intervention. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to diffuse tension, maintain stability, and reinforce his authority. This proactive methodology highlighted that enduring influence is achieved through foresight, not reaction. Adaptation was essential. Techniques effective in one era could become liabilities as circumstances evolved. Corozzo continuously refined his methods, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, disciplined execution, and strategic insight ensured resilience and long-term effectiveness. Ethically, his experience underscores a central lesson. Intelligence, negotiation, strategic planning, and risk assessment are inherently valuable. Applied within unlawful systems, they sustain survival and influence at societal cost. Redirected toward constructive, lawful endeavors, these same skills generate opportunity, security, and long-lasting impact. Corozzo's life demonstrates the dual potential of human capability and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes that true authority arises from navigating complexity with patience, foresight, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may appear formidable, but enduring power is cultivated through consistent, principled action. The capacity to foster stability, resilience, and opportunity through deliberate, disciplined choice defines lasting power. The chapter concludes with reflection. Strategic intelligence, foresight, and discipline are tools of extraordinary value. Their highest impact emerges when applied responsibly, cultivating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically sound. Quiet, measured authority, exercised with awareness and prudence, represents the truest form of power, leaving a legacy of resilience, wisdom, and foresight that endures far beyond ephemeral displays of control. In the shadowed corridors of influence, Joseph Corozzo navigated a world defined by subtlety, patience, and strategic foresight. True authority, he understood, rarely required overt displays. It emerged through consistent, disciplined action, meticulous observation, and the careful orchestration of circumstances. Those who encountered him gradually recognized a pattern. Decisions were deliberate, interventions precise, and guidance often invisible yet profoundly impactful. This quiet consistency established respect and trust that endured over time. Daily operations demanded continuous attention. Interpersonal relationships, obligations, and potential conflicts formed a complex network that required thoughtful evaluation. Corozzo approached each situation analytically, weighing motives, predicting outcomes, and assessing ripple effects. By anticipating challenges and acting preemptively, he mitigated risk and maintained stability. His restraint and foresight often achieved results that overt action could not, demonstrating that patience and strategic thinking are critical to sustaining influence. Financial management was executed with care. Large, conspicuous transactions invited scrutiny, while overly intricate operations introduced risk. Corozzo favored steady, measured strategies that prioritized long-term stability over immediate gains. This disciplined approach protected both resources and reputation. In an environment where exposure could have severe consequences, deliberate planning became a cornerstone of operational success. Communication functioned as both a tool and a safeguard. Words, gestures, and silences were carefully calibrated to convey meaning without attracting unnecessary attention. Corozzo mastered the art of indirect influence, shaping outcomes while maintaining discretion. Silence, when used strategically, often communicated more than speech, reinforcing authority without overt assertion. This subtle form of guidance consistently produced effective results. The psychological demands of his world were relentless. Observing nuanced behavior, interpreting subtle signals, and anticipating potential reactions required heightened mental discipline. Corozzo honed these skills to intervene preemptively, preventing conflicts from escalating. Emotional control was essential. Impulsive responses could compromise strategy and endanger both personal safety and operational stability. Patience and foresight were defining elements of his operational methodology. Generational dynamics within networks added complexity. Younger participants often sought rapid advancement or recognition, increasing exposure and instability. Corozzo managed these challenges through mentorship, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. His approach preserved operational continuity, reinforced stability, and ensured his influence persisted despite changing circumstances. Legal and societal pressures increased over time. Surveillance, investigative techniques, and law enforcement strategies required constant adaptation. Corozzo emphasized security, minimized visibility, and anticipated potential enforcement actions. Proactive planning allowed him to navigate threats effectively, maintaining authority and operational integrity in a landscape of growing scrutiny. Secrecy, while protective, exacted a personal cost. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional intimacy carried inherent risk. Corozzo compartmentalized his personal and professional life, balancing operational responsibilities with well-being. While safeguarding his position, this strategy reinforced solitude, highlighting the personal sacrifices inherent in high-stakes, high-risk environments. Crisis management was a constant responsibility. Unanticipated developments from internal disputes to external threats required measured, timely intervention. Corozzo's analytical approach enabled him to address challenges before escalation, preserving stability and reinforcing authority. Proactive problem-solving demonstrated that enduring influence relies on foresight rather than reaction. Adaptation remained critical. Strategies effective in one context could become liabilities in another. Corozzo continuously refined his methods, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, strategic insight, and disciplined execution ensured resilience and long-term success. Ethically, his experience offers a valuable lesson. Strategic thinking, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are powerful skills. When applied in unlawful frameworks, they sustain survival and influence, but at societal cost. Redirected toward constructive, lawful endeavors, the same skills generate opportunity, security, and lasting impact. Corozzo's life illustrates both the power and potential misapplication of human capability. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes that true authority arises from navigating complexity with intelligence, patience, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may appear formidable, but enduring power stems from consistent, principled action. The ability to foster stability, resilience, and opportunity through deliberate, disciplined choices defines lasting influence. The chapter concludes with reflection. Foresight, strategic intelligence, and discipline are tools of extraordinary value. Their highest potential is realized when applied responsibly, cultivating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically grounded. Quiet, measured authority, exercised with awareness and prudence, represents the truest form of power, leaving a legacy of resilience, wisdom, and foresight that endures far beyond fleeting displays of control. Influence is rarely about visibility. It is about consistency, foresight, and disciplined action. Joseph Corozzo exemplified this truth, navigating a complex world where subtlety often proved more effective than overt displays of power. His authority was earned through careful observation, strategic intervention, and the quiet orchestration of circumstances. Those around him gradually recognized his reliability, precision, and the stabilizing effect of his guidance, even when his presence was not overtly acknowledged. Daily operations were intricate. Relationships, obligations, and potential conflicts required continuous attention and thoughtful evaluation. Corozzo analyzed each situation, considering motives, predicting outcomes, and anticipating consequences. By addressing challenges before they escalated, he minimized risk and maintained operational stability. This measured approach demonstrated that restraint, patience, and foresight were often more effective than force in achieving lasting influence. Financial management demanded similar discipline. Large, conspicuous transactions attracted attention, while overcomplication created vulnerability. Corozzo emphasized steady, deliberate strategies that prioritized long-term stability over rapid gains. By planning methodically and exercising patience, he ensured that both resources and reputation remained secure. In high-stakes environments, deliberate management proved as crucial as decisive action. Communication was both a tool and a shield. Every word, gesture, and pause carried potential consequence. Corozzo mastered indirect influence, shaping outcomes without drawing unnecessary attention. His silence often conveyed more than words, reinforcing authority and credibility while maintaining discretion. This subtle guidance consistently produced effective and lasting results. The psychological demands of this environment were relentless. Observing subtle behavior, interpreting intentions, and predicting response required heightened mental acuity. Corozzo developed these skills to act preemptively, preventing conflicts from escalating. Emotional regulation was critical. Impulsive decisions could compromise both safety and operational effectiveness. Patience, foresight, and calculated intervention became hallmarks of his approach. Generational shifts within networks added complexity. Younger associates often sought rapid recognition or advancement, creating potential instability. Corozzo mitigated these risks through mentorship, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. His guidance preserved operational continuity, reinforced stability, and ensured his influence persisted across changing circumstances. Legal pressures were ever present. Surveillance, investigations, and monitoring demanded constant adaptation. Corozzo minimized exposure, emphasized security, and anticipated enforcement strategies. His proactive planning allowed him to navigate threats effectively, maintaining authority and operational integrity under scrutiny. Secrecy, while protective, carried personal costs. Relationships outside trusted circles were limited, and emotional vulnerability involved risk. Corozzo compartmentalized personal and professional spheres, balancing operational responsibilities with well-being. This necessary isolation highlighted the sacrifices inherent in high-stakes environments. Crisis management was continuous. Unanticipated events, from internal disputes to external threats, required prompt, measured intervention. Corozzo's analytical approach enabled him to diffuse tension, maintain stability, and reinforce authority. Proactive problem-solving illustrated that enduring influence arises from foresight and preparation rather than reactive action. Adaptation was critical. Techniques effective at one time could become liabilities later. Corozzo continuously refined strategies, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to maintain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, disciplined execution, and strategic insight ensured resilience and long-term success. Ethically, his life offers an important lesson. Skills such as negotiation, strategic planning, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence are universally valuable. When applied within unlawful frameworks, they sustain survival and influence at societal cost. Redirected toward lawful, constructive endeavors, the same abilities create opportunity, security, and lasting impact. Corozzo's story highlights both the power of skill and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes that true authority emerges from navigating complexity with intelligence, patience, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may appear formidable, but enduring power comes from consistent, principled action. The capacity to foster stability, resilience, opportunity through deliberate, disciplined choices defines lasting influence. The chapter closes with reflection. Strategic intelligence, foresight, and discipline are powerful tools. Their highest potential is realized when applied responsibly, cultivating influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically sound. Quiet, measured authority, exercised with awareness and prudence, represents the truest form of power, leaving a legacy of wisdom, resilience, and foresight that endures far beyond fleeting displays of control. The culmination of influence is measured not by outward spectacle, but by the consistency of disciplined, strategic action. Joseph Corozzo's journey through complex networks of power exemplifies this principle. True authority, he understood, arose from careful observation, patient decision-making, and the quiet orchestration of circumstances. Over time, his subtle guidance became the stabilizing force within a volatile environment, commanding respect and trust without overt assertion. Each day brought a maze of challenges, relationships, obligations, and potential. Conflicts demanded continuous attention and thoughtful evaluation. Corozzo approached each interaction with strategic foresight, analyzing motives, predicting outcomes, and anticipating consequences. By acting preemptively, he mitigated risk, prevented escalation, and maintained operational stability. His discipline demonstrated that foresight and patience often achieve results unattainable through immediate action or intimidation. Financial operations were executed with equal care. Large, conspicuous transactions attracted attention, while overly complex strategies invited error. Corozzo favored steady, measured approaches that prioritize long-term stability over rapid gains. Methodical planning ensured the protection of both assets and reputation. In an environment where exposure carried significant consequences, deliberate management became as critical as tactical action. Communication functioned as a tool of influence and a safeguard. Words, gestures, and silence were carefully calibrated to convey intentions while minimizing risk. Corozzo mastered indirect guidance, shaping decisions and outcomes without drawing attention. Strategic silence often communicated more effectively than speech, reinforcing authority while maintaining discretion. This subtle approach consistently produced durable results. The psychological demands of this environment were relentless. Observing nuances in behavior, interpreting subtle signals, and predicting reactions required acute awareness and mental discipline. Corozzo developed these skills to intervene proactively, diffusing conflicts before they escalated. Emotional control was essential. Impulsivity could compromise strategy and endanger both personal and operational stability. Patience and foresight became hallmarks of his operational approach. Generational shifts within networks introduced additional challenges. Younger associates often sought immediate recognition or rapid advancement, which could increase risk. Corozzo navigated these dynamics through mentorship, selective engagement, and modeling disciplined behavior. His guidance preserved continuity, reinforced stability, and ensured influence persisted despite changing circumstances. Legal and societal pressures intensified over time. Advanced surveillance, forensic methods, and investigative strategies demanded constant adaptation. Corozzo emphasized operational security, minimized exposure, and anticipated enforcement techniques. Proactive planning allowed him to maintain authority and effectiveness under scrutiny, illustrating the necessity of foresight in high-risk environments. Secrecy, while protective, exacted personal costs. Relationships outside trusted networks were limited, and emotional vulnerability carried inherent risk. Corozzo compartmentalized personal and professional life, balancing operational responsibilities with personal well-being. This isolation, though necessary, underscored the sacrifices inherent in high-stakes, high-pressure environments. Crisis management became routine. Unanticipated developments, from internal disputes to external threats, required swift yet measured responses. Corozzo's analytical approach allowed him to address challenges before escalation, preserving stability and reinforcing authority. Proactive problem-solving emphasized that enduring influence relies on foresight and preparation rather than reactionary force. Adaptation remained essential. Techniques effective in one era could become liabilities in another. Corozzo continuously refined strategies, anticipating changes and adjusting operations to sustain influence while minimizing exposure. Flexibility, strategic insight, and disciplined execution ensured resilience and long-term success. Ethically, his experience offers a profound lesson. Strategic thinking, negotiation, emotional intelligence, and risk assessment are powerful human tools. Within unlawful frameworks, they sustain survival and influence at societal cost. Applied constructively in lawful contexts, these skills generate opportunity, security, and enduring positive impact. Corozzo's life illustrates both the power of capability and the consequences of its misapplication. Ultimately, this final chapter emphasizes that true authority arises from navigating complexity with intelligence, foresight, and ethical awareness. Influence achieved in secrecy may seem formidable, but enduring power is rooted in consistent, principled action. The ability to cultivate stability, resilience, and opportunity through deliberate, disciplined choices defines lasting authority. The story closes with reflection, intelligence, strategy, and disciplined foresight are tools of immense value. Their highest potential is realized when applied responsibly, producing influence that is effective, sustainable, and ethically grounded. Quiet, measured authority exercised with prudence and awareness represents the truest form of power. It leaves a legacy of resilience, wisdom, and foresight that extends far beyond fleeting displays of control, offering lessons in discipline, patience, and the enduring value of ethical decision-making.